Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation Podcast Network.
You're listening to Healthcare Matters, the podcast that pulls back the curtain to help you make sense of complex healthcare economics and policy issues. As always, we're joined by Dr. Robert Popovian, tuning in from Washington, D.C. He's a pharmacist, an economist, and the Chief Science Policy Officer at the Global Healthy Living Foundation.
And joining me is my good friend, Conner Mertens in Seattle, my co-host and our patient advocate and community outreach manager. And this episode is a special one for us at Healthcare Matters and for you, our listeners, because this is Conner's last episode. He is moving on to bigger and better things in life. And Conner, this has been an exceptional run. You know, we're concluding our 4th season and the podcast will continue on without you.
Show must go on. Show must go on, Robert. Keep it going.
Hey, look, I grew up in Hollywood, California. The show always goes on. But in the meantime, you know, for our last episode, I have a number in my mind, which is 35%. What does that mean for you?
I think we talked about it last episode, but all the upheaval in Seattle, I think 35% is the chance that the Seahawks pick a good coach for the next season. But that might be a little high. I could be a little optimistic there.
An alumnus of University of Southern California, it still breaks my heart that they pushed Pete Carroll out the door and he didn't want to leave. And it's going to be interesting to see what Seattle does. But no, so 35% is the percentage by which the list price of a generic version of the Flovent, which is a very popular inhaler for patients with asthma, is cheaper compared to the brand version. And what happened is that GSK, which is the company that makes Flovent, decided that they were going to pull the brand drug from the market and introduce a generic version of it at 35% discount. And guess what? And this was covered in Wall Street Journal article that came out earlier this year. The major PBMs are refusing to cover the generic version, even though it's 35% cheaper. So it's a great transition to today's topic of misaligned incentives, as we've discussed. And this is a great example of a misaligned incentive that exists with the PBMs and in our market access and our biopharmaceutical access market.
Well, Robert, it feels fitting that for our last episode together, we're going to be talking PBM shenanigans as always. This is a topic that we cover extensively because there are so many practices that are shady and detrimental to patients. So it's only fitting that we're on a familiar topic. The article in the Wall Street Journal got a lot of attention in social media, actually. Can you tell us a little bit more about what happened?
Again, it got a lot of attention because at the end of the day, a pharma company decided that they had enough of playing the rebate game that we've discussed in the past with the PBMs. They said, you know what? We're going to remove this drug from the market from a brand perspective. It's called Flovent. As I said, it's a very popular drug that's used a lot by asthmatics. We're going to introduce a generic version through our manufacturing facility, so no differences between this drug and the brand name drug. And we're going to introduce it into the market at 35% discount. So that's great. List price discount. And what happened is that for some odd reason, not odd, obviously, we've talked about these misaligned incentives, PBMs have decided that they're not going to cover this generic version. Why? And this is why a lot of things came out in the social media is because it is not as profitable for the PBMs to cover the generic version compared to the brand version. And that's where the misaligned incentives come into the play.
So how do rebate systems affect drug formularies and patient access to medications?
Well, the way they affect it is that the higher the rebate, the more incentive it is for the PBM to cover the medicine. So they like having these higher priced branded drugs, which provide huge rebates and fees and concessions to them, which, by the way, they don't pass all of it back to the employer and almost none of it back to the patient. And they keep that as profit. And therefore, it causes misaligned incentives where they prefer those type of environments. And this Flovent example is the perfect scenario that was laid out in the open through this Wall Street Journal article that demonstrates how rebates and fees and everything collected really dictates what they are willing to cover. They're more willing to cover expensive medicines because that's more profitable to them than inexpensive generic drugs that are cheaper for the patient.
Well, again, these are topics that we've covered extensively before, the passing on concessions to patients. GHLF, we've talked about this for several years concerning formulary exclusions. Is that kind of the same discussion we're having now?
Yeah, it is. That's why drugs get excluded from formularies, because we talk to the PBM and the PBM excuses that, look, the net cost of the brand name drug is less than the net cost of the generic drug because I was getting a lot of rebates and fees and concessions from the pharma companies. But the question becomes the net price for whom? Perhaps the net price is cheaper for the PBM, but because they keep majority of those concessions, and especially the fees, almost all of the fees that they collect, and pass almost none of it back to either the employer or very little of it, and then 100% they're not passing any of it back to the patient, it is less expensive to them. But that's not what we're here for. We're here for patients saving money, employers having benefit designs that they can afford. And instead, what the PBMs are doing is creating an environment where they're excluding medicines for no other reasons because they're not as profitable to them than the lower priced alternatives that have been introduced into the market.
As we start looking at different solutions, I'm thinking about the news about Eli Lilly directly selling to consumers that weight loss product, right? And is this direct to consumer model, is that something that's worth pursuing for patients or for the pharmaceutical industry?
It is, and it's not a new model. I mean, Conner, when I was at Pfizer, we tried to directly sell the smoking cessation drug Chantix to the consumers through a similar model that Eli Lilly has proposed for this weight loss drug. And it didn't work because I don't think the environment was ready for it. This was about a decade ago. But I think we're ready now to have this type of conversations about direct consumer purchasing of drugs. And we've seen the model work, right? In the last couple of years, there's been a lot of discussions about patients bypassing insurance, especially for generic drugs, and going directly and paying cash at certain pharmacies that are willing to sell these drugs at a much lower price to the patient in a cash base than compared to what it would cost them to utilize their insurance card. And the most recent example is the Mark Cuban pharmacy that has gotten a lot of media attention. But that model has been around for a while. Costco has been doing it. Walmart has been doing it. There's a lot of independent pharmacies like Blueberry Pharmacy has been doing it. And there's the Freedom Pharmacy in Ohio. These pharmacies have been thriving and helping patients save thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars by bypassing their insurance and purchasing it directly from pharmacies. It's not just what Eli Lilly is doing, just going directly and selling the product to the patient, but also this model has been growing in the last few years, especially in the generic market. But we need to go beyond that, Conner. There has to be a different thought process about perhaps the pharma companies should start directly selling to certain health providers. And it's not a new concept. The largest insurer in this country, in the largest state that we have, in California, Kaiser Permanente, buys directly from pharma companies. They bypass the middleman with regards to wholesalers and things, and they take inventory of the drug from the pharma company, and they have warehouses that they place these medicines and they're direct contracting with them without going through a PBM. And the same model can be explored with other type of large institutions that are willing to purchase directly from pharma companies, bypassing a lot of the middlemen, and are able to then lower those prices. Both the pharma company will make more money, and guess what? The end user, the institution, will pay a lower price. So it's a win-win situation. Lower prices for the institution and higher margins or better profit for the pharma company. And they bypass the middleman. And that's my thought, is that that's another area that needs to be explored. Why can't a Texas oncology that serves about 50% of patients in Texas, the second largest state in the country, bypass all of the middlemen and directly purchase oncology drugs from the biopharma companies? The third thing is pharma companies now need to explore directly selling their drugs to employers. There are big employers out there like Walmart and Walgreens, and they're sitting out there and they have the wit to be able to purchase these drugs, bypass everybody else, bypass the insurance companies, bypass the PBMs, and really acquire these medicines for their employees at a significant discount. I know those models are being tested and have have been tested, and PBMs, when they get a wind of them, they threaten the pharma company that if they pursue any kind of direct selling to employers, that they will remove all of their products from the PBM formularies. And that threat is real because they have a lot of, as we've talked about, a lot of wit and bandwidth and might in the marketplace. So there's a lot of different ways to pursue this. I think the Lilly example is great. It's nothing novel. I think other companies like Pfizer I mentioned has tried it, but we need to do this direct to consumer, direct to employer, direct to provider models to bypass all of this infrastructure unnecessary who's profiting from all of this and really going to the endpoint consumer.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like this is a model that the direct to consumer has the potential to be beneficial financially for patients and the biopharmaceutical industry. Would that mean that only people opposed to this would be who? The PBMs?
Yeah, the PBMs are opposed to it. I mean, they hate the cash-based pharmacies for generics, right? And their opposition is somewhat hollow because they're claiming, well, we are losing touch with our patients because we don't manage them clinically now because we don't have access to whether or not they went and got the medicine from their cash-based pharmacy, and we don't have that in their records. That's baloney. To me, that needs to be resolved because you, as a PBM, as an insurer, has to provide better patient care, but not to the detriment of patients overpaying for their generic medicines and trying to find a better deal at Costco or at Walmart or at the Cuban pharmacy or at the Freedom Pharmacy. You should not be penalizing them to overpay for the generics because your excuse is now that I need to capture that drug because I need to have it in the portfolio of the medicines that they're taking. Figure out a way. Remember, you're not only paying for their drugs, but you're providing health insurance now because, as we know, we've talked about it in this episodes, PBMs own insurance companies. This vertical integration has happened. So guess what? It is in your incentive to capture that. So figure out a way to do it, but don't penalize patients by making them pay more by using their insurance card.
Well, I guess one of my last questions is what other areas can biopharmaceutical companies consider regarding direct selling? I wonder, and maybe this is a shot in the dark, would this sort of model have any impact on things like innovation or expanding access?
Well, expanding access, definitely. We've seen this, right? If pharma companies are able to sell directly to patients, the access improves. If they are able to bypass, for example, and sell directly to a health system, they will lower prices, therefore access will be better. We talked about some of those models. At the end of the day, every model that needs to be pursued is that whether or not we cut out more middlemen from the model and go directly to the consumer. And this thing has happened, as we discussed. Eli Lilly is trying to do it with this weight loss drugs. Pfizer tried to do it with the smoking cessation medicines. Generic drugs, you hear every day patients are saving thousands of dollars by going and directly paying cash at the pharmacy. So we need to pursue these models. And it's not only in the pharmaceutical business, Conner. I don't know if you've heard the term direct primary care, but this is a group of primary care physicians who are telling consumers, and believe me, they're growing in number, that if you come to me and pay me directly instead of going through your insurance, I will save you money long term in your insurance costs, and you will have unlimited access to me. Direct primary care is another concept that needs to be galvanized, and we need to pursue that because patients are saving money and getting better care instead of going through the insurance bureaucracy.
I'll tell you what, Robert, that's a pretty thorough conversation. Is there anything else you want to add to the conversation?
No, I mean, look, the Wall Street Journal article was great because one of the top newspapers read covered this issue of misaligned incentives, how a 35% cheaper medicine is being denied. Patients are being denied of it. And remember, Conner, patient out-of-pocket costs, especially if you have a deductible or a coinsurance, which we all do, is based on the retail price. So patients would have saved money with this generic Flovent. But because PBMs are not profiting as much by covering the generic Flovent instead of the brand name drug, they're refusing and they've removed it from the formulary to the detriment of patients saving money, but more importantly, to the detriment of patient healthcare. There are patients, thousands, millions of patients who are on Flovent who today are unable to access that through their insurance model. So, Conner, you're a dear friend. I can't thank you enough for your excellent collaboration on these podcasts. These podcasts would not have been as successful without you. You've been an amazing partner, a co-host, a friend. I want to thank you so much. I'm going to miss talking about Seattle sports with you and needling you about all of the sport teams that make the wrong decisions in the upper Northwest. But I'm going to give you the last word this time, Conner.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I guess on this topic specifically, put a little bow on it. When we talk about these models, we just got to be trying to find ways to make healthcare better and more accessible and cheaper for patients. And things like this, these formulary exclusions and lack of passing on of incentives, these directly get in the way of that. Any way we can find some extra money for patients and make their lives a little easier, I think we're all in on. But I can't thank you enough for the time on this podcast, Robert, our time working together. You've been an incredible colleague, incredible friend. Being able to talk the failures and successes in sports, our Taylor Swift talks, and just all things healthcare. It's been a pleasure, and I've just been a sponge here. You're absolutely brilliant, and I think what makes this podcast so easy is I'm learning along with the rest of our audience. So it's been something special, and don't worry, I'm going to stay subscribed. I'm going to be tuned in for whoever fills this seat and sits behind this microphone, because there's always going to be more to learn about and more policy and more healthcare to inform our communities about. And at the end of the day, I'm never going to stop fighting for patients. I'm proud of the work we've done, and specifically the conversations that we've had here. So thank you, Robert. And a special thank you to our audience. Without you, none of this would be possible, and you're the reason we do what we do. Robert's going to be back for more enlightening episodes next season. In the meantime, do what I did. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you might be listening, so you never miss an episode. And if you have a second, spread the word by rating our podcast, writing one of those positive reviews, and sharing with your friends and family. It'll help more people like you find us.
And if you have any questions, as Conner mentioned, we're going to continue to season 5 relatively soon here, because we have some papers coming out from GHLF that we would like to talk about on this podcast. So if you have any questions, thoughts, comments, suggestions, please send it our way at podcast@ghlf.org.
And before you go, make sure to take a listen to some of the other great podcasts on the GHLF Podcast Network. You can find all of GHLF's podcasts at ghlf.org/listen. As always, he's Dr. Robert Popovian.
And he's Conner Mertens. See y'all next time.
Be inspired, supported, and empowered. This is the Global Healthy Living Foundation Podcast Network.